So that timeline is getting emptied out. There is a massive shift underway on our timeline right now, triggered by the death of Charlie Kirk. No pun intended when I say triggered. That was awful. What an awful intro. Let me try that again. Oh, this is a very difficult video to make, you guys. Mainly difficult because I understand how many people are ready to misunderstand what I'm about to say. No, I'm not going to talk politics. You should know by now that that is not my drift, not what I do, but this is something incredibly important. We're going to talk about so much today: religion and Christ consciousness and what the difference is. And we're going to talk about the light workers that are shifting the timeline right now and how. But let's start off talking about prophecy. There's a lot in today's video. Stay to the end because there's a heartfelt moment that we all need. Okay. The prophecy, I had no idea in the last video that I put up. It was called The Turning Point for Humanity, or what was it called? The Turning Point. God, I even have to write it down, you guys. That's where I am. Turning Points in Ascension, Density Anchors Dissolving. That was the name of the video. And there's a string of prophecy. You know, I don't normally stutter when I talk. Whew, this is really just such an upwelling, I think, for all humanity. But it's an upwelling of light. It is an upwelling of righteousness. The turning point, I had no idea, obviously, at the time that Charlie Kirk's organization was called Turning Point, but that was where I started to look into what was going on. The video prior to that, I had spoken about the shadow. I had spoken about the lunar eclipse and how the lunar eclipse brings up the shadow. I had spoken about the solar eclipse. By the way, the lunar eclipse happens on the 7th of September, the solar eclipse on the 21st. So Charlie Kirk's passing happened just, 2 days after, or 3 days after the lunar eclipse. So we were still very much in the window of that lunar eclipse energy. And it's all about facing the shadow. That's what I shared with you. I also shared with you that in that corridor, that bridge between those two eclipse spaces, the lunar and the solar, there is going to be an unplugging. You're going to feel like you're in this weird unplugged space. More prophecy. I'm going to tie it all together. Don't worry. There's a video called, I need to look down to see what I actually called the video. Guys, I never remember the names of my videos. It's quite a problem. The timeline has never done this before. That's the video that I'm talking about. There's me in the thumbnail. I think I'm doing, I don't know, some weird karate move. Anyway, the story in that video, the storyline in that video was about how we have two timelines, and this is where it's going to get really interesting. We have two timelines pulling apart, splitting, in the process of splitting apart. Right now, it's still one timeline. They're in the process of splitting apart, but they've never been further apart than now. And every day they go further and further apart. So it creates this massive chasm between the two timelines. And what's going to happen is, I explained in this video, every light worker is going to be called into that in-between space. And I explained it as feeling very unplugged and very limbo-like. When you're in that place, life gets just hazy and weird. And the reason why light workers were going to need to go in there would be to be a bridge to pull people from the lower timeline that want to leave the lower timeline over into the higher timeline, because the distance between the two energetically in terms of frequency is now too big. So light workers were going to serve as bridges to bring them over. That is exactly what's taking place right now. And I'm going to share a very beautiful image, a visual image that comes to me about that in just a little while. The catalyst has not so much been about a political figure. It is not even about politics. It's about the way people reacted to his death. There was a gentleman who I've never seen before, don't even know his name, but I came across his video and I find it so moving, so heartwarming, because he didn't like Charlie Kirk, but his response to the death of Charlie Kirk is human. Then there are responses that are absolutely inhumane, so completely devoid of humanity, of heart. See, we've reached a place of dysfunctionality that says, look, if I don't agree with you, then I simply can't like you. And that is a lower timeline energy. That is a lower timeline frequency. I put videos up and I will link them for you where I explain more about the split of the two timelines. One goes to 5D and another one goes in to repeat the next ascension cycle. There are those people who've become so militant in their mindedness. They have become so obstinate. They believe in cancel culture. They believe in naming and shaming. They believe that death is deservable punishment and that children deserve to be without a father and that a wife deserves to be without a husband. It's got nothing to do with whether you agree with him or not. I believe that Charlie Kirk was a very good man. And some people will be outraged and go, oh, so that means you believe X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying I believe everything that he believes. I'm not even a Christian. He was a very staunch Christian. I respect that I don't believe it, but that doesn't mean that I cannot like him, respect him, or be devoid of empathy for him. See, that's more of that natural human response that I alluded to earlier. It's natural to see a travesty and to mourn and to grieve. When we see people celebrating, dancing, whooping, cheering, jeering for the death of somebody just because that person is of a mindset that is different to theirs, that person is lost. Now, there are a lot of people that were walking that lower timeline that saw what the response and the reaction to Charlie's passing was. And they suddenly went, I don't belong here. This isn't my home. This isn't my frequency. And there's a mass migration right now from the lower timeline into the higher timeline. There is a mass migration. This pops into my mind. Somebody, I noticed it this morning, put a comment up on a post that I put on Instagram, and it was just a post about mainstream news. It wasn't aimed at any particular event. It wasn't aimed at any particular person. It was just at mainstream news and how it's the job of fake news to show us fake news. Why are we surprised at this, right? And somebody put in a comment there, and the comment was, I refuse to believe that Donald Trump is a good person. And my response to it is this. I'm not telling you have to believe he's a good person or a bad person. I'm not telling you what your belief needs to be. What I'm saying is this. There are a lot of people who are stuck in their beliefs, whether they're right, whether they're wrong. They're stuck in belief. And now is the time to move beyond belief into truth. If I believe something, it's kind of like me saying, I think this is true. I think that this is true. And when I say I refuse to believe anything but my belief, then I'm saying I'm really stuck in this viewpoint and I will not shift out of it, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. So there is a time, and the time is now, to move out of this is what I believe and into this is what I see. This is what I see. But to step into this is what I see, you have to let go of what I believe in order to allow yourself that experience of saying, okay, now this is what I see. Separate to my beliefs, this is what's actually there. And maybe it's going to validate what your beliefs were, and maybe it's going to invalidate what your beliefs were. But there's a lot of people who've been too afraid to have their beliefs challenged. So they haven't allowed themselves to transcend something that is a thought. A belief is a thought in the mind to a lived truth. The mass migration from the lower timeline to the higher timeline are those people who are ready to put aside their beliefs. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But what's taking place right now is people have seen humanity acting with such depravity and saying, I'm not a part of that. I'm not a part of that insensitivity, and I'm not a part of that density of consciousness. It's the trigger point. It's the turning point for humanity. Entities and demons is something that I've spoken about so frequently. And when I do, I get called names. Naysayer, fearmongerer, fear porn, oh gosh, all sorts of things. I get called all these names because people don't want to talk about entities and demons. They say it's not real. It's not real. I'll tell you what's not real. What's not real, as in what is not true to the human species, is the celebration of death. That is not true to the human heart. And when we see people that have strayed so far from humanity, from their human senses, what we might think of as just plain human decency. When we see people that have strayed so far from that, we're seeing people under the influence of either entities or demons, which ultimately is really the same thing, just with different words. Another video that I put up, more prophecy, you guys, is a video about the collapse of the astral realm. And I said to you, the astral realm still very much exists, but the membrane that separated us and that realm is broken, which means broken. It's completely collapsed. And that means that the astral, which housed a lot of entities and demons, is pouring out into our everyday reality, which means a lot more people will need to host those entities and those demons, or repel them by shining light, their inner luminosity. We're going to talk more about this. The inner luminosity, which is the inner activation of love, the inner activation of truth. When we transcend belief and we can come into truth, we can come into knowing, we can come into the heart. But here's something. Guess why a lot of people don't go into the heart? Because there's a layer of grief that shields them. And what I mean by that is our hearts are naturally Christ-like. Our hearts are naturally attuned to Christ consciousness, but we've become unattuned or we've become disengaged. And what that means is we've become unplugged from the divine truth of who we are. When I talk about Christ consciousness, I'm not talking about a religion at all. I realize that there are many people who listen to me that are deeply religious and others who are not. And I personally am not and never have been a religious person. I've always been a very spiritual person, and I see the two as different, but hopefully leading to the same place, kind of like different paths that lead home. Interestingly enough, a lot of the abuse that I've taken in my comment section in the past has come from Christians. A lot of the abuse has come from people calling me, all sorts of names. I can't wait until God punishes you. I can't wait until God shows you what a bad person you are. I can't wait until you're suffering. I feel sorry for your children. You're a false prophet. I feel so sorry for anybody that's caught up by you. You're going to be punished and you're leading them all to punishment. You're a sinner. Oh boy. Oh wow. Oh, don't get me started. One of my very best friends, however, is a Christian. You see, I can be friends with somebody who doesn't see the world through my lens. I can respect them because they're a respectable person. And because, as we openly and honestly share, we both have a deep reverence for Christ. We just reach that same portal through different means. And Charlie was one of those beautifully rare people who could use Christianity for that, who could use Christianity as a means to connect to that Christed love, which isn't aggressive, but is truthful. It is not a need to punish. You see, there are many people who are lost both in Christianity as well as in spirituality. So I cannot say to you, this is right and that's wrong. What I can say to you is how we react, how we show up to truth is what determines the timeline that we're on. You can have 1,000 different beliefs. How integrated those beliefs are into truth is everything right now. So, yes, entities and demons are very real. Yes, entities and demons are absolutely moving into the lower timeline and cohabitating, and in a sense, creating a parasitic relationship with those beings in the lower timeline. And those beings are acting as the parasitic entities instead of the human heart, the Christed heart. Christ consciousness is the frequency of gold. Humanity in their truth vibrate to the frequency of gold. Christ consciousness, if you were to ask me what it is, I would simply say it is the truth of the human being. The truth of the human being to love unconditionally and to be connected to God's source creator consciousness unconditionally. To accept unconditionally is the birthplace of love that is unconditional. We are the second coming. When Christ said, I will return, it is through the human heart that Christ is right now in the process of returning. Here's a very beautiful image, you guys. I felt this image so powerfully. 2 timelines, we know this, splitting apart. Here's the visual. I described a little bit earlier, we've got the Lightworkers who have en masse, from the higher timeline, en masse, jumped into that in-between space where they feel very unplugged, where they feel very hazy, but they feel that there's a purpose. I have to do this. You know what's so interesting to me? There are so many light workers right now who don't even know that they're light workers. There are so many people right now who are saying things like, I don't know why I want to go to church for the first time in my life, but I want to go to church. I don't know why I want to buy a Bible, but I want to buy a Bible. And maybe that's just the means that they know to connect with Christ consciousness. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, does it? How we get to love, it matters that we return to the love that we are. I don't need anybody to follow me. I don't need anybody to agree with me. My role is not to have people follow me, but it's to have people being able to follow themselves, not their beliefs, but their truth that comes from their heart, from their pure heartedness. Every human being at the core is pure love. Everyone listening right now, you are pure love, but for everyone, not many, not some, for everyone, there has been multiple generations worth of pain that covers up our heart. And like I said earlier, grief is very often the covering that covers the heart, that prevents the heart from being able to love. There are layers of pain that sit over our love center. And right now, grief is being purged, grief is being released. There are people who connect with Charlie without even having known what Charlie was about, but are in massive, massive grief right now. His passing is a catalyst for a resurgence of Christ consciousness. I pray that nobody gets lost in, yes, but he believed this and I don't, therefore I can't have compassion. This is just about the human way. The human way is to care. The human way is what we need to return to right now. So back to that picture, 2 timelines, light workers en masse jumping into that luminal space in between the 2 timelines and just holding out their hands, which is to say holding out their heart, which is to say clearing their grief, their collective illusion. And here it's going to get really interesting. As they clear out their pain, their illusion, look at where they're doing it. They're doing it in that in-between space, kind of like we're doing it on the job, right? We're not waiting till we're healed perfectly to show up perfectly. We're showing up authentically, which is ironically more perfect than perfection itself. The light workers are stepping into their truth, and it is not with force that they are pulling over those from the lower timeline, but it is with love, it is with embracing, it is with compassion. Here's something that I have said in many videos before, and that is there will come a time when even the most heinous person on the planet, somebody who we vow to hate or we want them to be punished, where even those beings we will have to see what they've done, most certainly, but still find some means of acceptance and love for that person. In other words, what I have always advocated, no matter who the person is to find some measure of compassion for humanity. And we cannot do that if we do not have compassion for ourselves. We are the birthplace. And this is what the light workers in the in-between are discovering right now. So they're with their love for themselves deepening, with their grief alleviating, they are in the process of pulling more over into the higher timeline. And guess what else? The shadow. Because the shadow is one of the things that is the catalyst right now. As much as I'm saying, oh, it's Charlie Kirk's death that is the catalyst, I would say to you, it is the shadow that people are confronting through his death, their own personal shadow. That's what he's catalyzing. That's what that lunar eclipse was all about. It was about bringing up the shadow. And guess what's been sitting in the shadow? We've said it already. Definitely grief, but what else? Power. Isn't that a beautiful thing about the shadow? In the shadow is everything we couldn't deal with. That's what the shadow is all about. It's everything we couldn't see, wouldn't see. And we always interpret that as, oh, all my pain, all my suppressed, all my wrongdoings, all my shame. That's all what sits in the shadow. Sure, that's some of what sits in the shadow, but so is all of your magnificence been sitting in the shadow. So is all of your worthiness that you couldn't claim because you thought it was boastfulness. You thought you weren't allowed to feel all of these things. Your miraculous nature is sitting in the shadow. Your Christed nature is sitting in the shadow. People are claiming that now. Your power that's been sitting in the shadow. Humanity, whoa, claiming their power now. So those that are clinging into the delusion and illusion of the lower timeline, they're always going to be welcome to do that. No one is going to force them out or even debate them out. Do you know that I do not? There are many people that try to debate me in my comment sections about things that I've said. You never will find me debating with anyone. I respect those who can. I simply will not, because truth in my world isn't something to debate. It is something you can see or something that you cannot see. And if you cannot see it, you move on. And I hope that there are people that do that with this video. I hope that there are people who listen to this video, maybe in disagreement, and understand that is simply their signal to move on. There is no place for abuse and condemnation anymore. And if you entertain that mindset of abuse and condemnation, then all that you're doing is securing your place in a lower timeline. I pray that those who are ready to commit to the lower timeline and stay in abuse and stay in condemnation and all of those things, that they just go and do that. And that number is, here's an interesting thing, that number is going to dwindle. This is still part of the image that I wanted to share with you. The lower timeline, some of them are jumping ship, right, into the higher timeline, sure. But those that are staying there are now clinging to their pain, clinging to the parasites that they're hosting, that they're going to start showing up more and more as that depravity of humanity, that delusion, that illusion, that psychopathy. They're going to start showing up in that. You're going to say, well, God, Kerry, that sounds kind of awful. And now, shouldn't I be more scared? What you're going to find is that that was always meant to happen. They will eventually collapse under the weight of the darkness that they cannot carry anymore. Because what always happens with parasites? They feed off of the host body for only as long as they can, until eventually that body cannot sustain them anymore. They eventually, in other words, will take themselves out. Our job is to be the truth, be the light. We're not engaging in fighting. We're not engaging in abuse. We're not engaging in any of the tactics of that lower timeline. Christ consciousness is rising. And guess what else is rising? I would describe it to you as this: a hunger for God. A hunger. It's also come out of the shadow. People realizing, wow, I have this insatiable desire to know God, whether it's through religion, whether it's through spirituality. I have an insatiable hunger for God. So that happens also on the higher timeline. I did speak about the light workers who are in that in between. Most of them will be there at least for most of September, at least until the solar eclipse that happens around about, I think it's the 21st, 22nd of September. A lot of light workers, I would say the mass of light workers, are going to be in that in between space during that time. But when they rejoin, step back into the higher timeline, which is still obviously manned by many millions of light workers, because light workers are not just people who wear the badge light worker, who call themselves light workers. Light workers are simply people of goodness. They are people of love. They can be of any faith, any persuasion. It is not about what you believe. It is about what you exude. It is about the love that you radiate that makes you, it's about the light that you radiate that makes you a light worker. So in that higher timeline, there are many who stand on that higher timeline, anchoring light, radiating light. More prophecy, you guys. In that video that I spoke about, that was the video called Turning Point in Ascension. The density anchors that were keeping people in the lower timeline, they're dissolving. This was also pre-planned. And when I say pre-planned, I pause there because I don't mean to say that I knew that Charlie Kirk was going to be murdered. I didn't know that. I can see how when one light falls, millions more rise up. I can see that that's what's taking place. And that timeline of the light workers becomes so luminous right now, and the timeline of the lower consciousness becomes so difficult to be in, so dark, so dense, but never impossible to leave. Those beings are being given every support to reach into themselves, to reach first into themselves, first into the place that says, yes, these are my beliefs, and I refuse to shift my belief into, but what would happen if I did? Into what would happen if I just got courageous enough to allow myself to feel what is true, or to see what is true outside of what I am telling reality it is. Maybe there is a layer of reality that for all of them, they're going to be given the option to see right now or not. That everything comes down to choice, everything. And that is very much their choice right now. So that timeline is getting emptied out. The lower timeline is getting emptied out. The higher timeline suddenly sees a mass of newcomers, a mass of beings start joining the higher timeline now. And that is love. And that is celebration. Here's the thing that I want to share with you. It's about death. Death, gosh, you guys, there are so many interesting analogies that come up, and most of the time they come up just in the middle of a video or in the middle of a call, very often a live call with the Plasma Light Tribe. You guys know what I'm talking about. Man, we've spoken about vomit, we've spoken about poop, we've spoken about all sorts of things. Analogies just, there's nothing I can do. They come up in the moment, and boy, oh boy. Yeah, my regulars who meet with me every Friday, you guys know what I'm talking about. But there's an analogy that I put up actually here on YouTube a while back where I described God as a chocolate cake. True story. Here's another one. Life is an apple. Here's how the apple analogy works. Life that we call living right now, that we call real, that we call reality, it's a sliver of apple, like a slice of apple that is so paper thin, you hold it up and you see right through it. We call that the false matrix. We call that reality. We call that life. Then somebody dies and we say, oh, they're gone. We say they're lost. No, they're not lost. We've lost our ability to see them because they don't only exist in that sliver of apple anymore. They're still partially in that sliver, but they are now aware of themselves in the apple that sliver comes from, on the tree on which that apple is hanging, in the orchard in which that tree is on the land that holds the orchard under the sun that showers it with light. They become aware of themselves in the totality of creation. So we see it as a loss. It is not loss. It is them coming back to the totality of who they are. And they're calling us now not to die in order to go back to the totality of who we are, but also to remember that we're being given a bridge. It is not just the light workers holding themselves as a bridge for the lower timeline to join us. There is also a higher consciousness. We can call them the angelic, we can call it God, we can call it the universe. There is beings of higher love doing exactly the same thing for us right now on the higher timeline. So look at how that image has just expanded that I've been describing for you. There's another bridge that we hadn't seen before, and it's the bridge that's being offered to us from the highest levels of love, the highest levels of creation. And as we allow that into ourselves, we begin to remember who we are in the orchard. We begin to remember who we are beyond the sliver. Does that resonate with you for every loved one that you've ever perceived lost in your life? Do you realize that death is not loss? Oh, it's painful. Oh, yes. Oh, it's painful. Yes. You guys, I've been in massive sadness, massive grief for the last few days. And that grief, if you go into it, is necessary. But don't con yourself into thinking that it is a grief that is irreparable, because all grief leads to love. In fact, grief is simply the access point to love that was blocked becoming open again. And this is why we cry. We cry because it's all the pain that we hadn't felt. And underneath all the pain we hadn't felt, all the love that we hadn't expressed, which is more painful than any pain, more painful than any trauma that sits on the surface blocking the love, is the inability to express the love that's underneath everything that underpins you and the very truth of who you are. Rearranging myself. Beautiful beings of love, of Christ consciousness, from my heart all the way to yours. So much love.